guys! All right, are you ready for chapter 1? Here we go. Chapter 1, a sure fix. Of course, it had to be rainy weather. How fitting for a day like today, Celeste thought, as the raindrops came splashing down on the windshield of her always reliable 1992 white VW Scirocco. Celeste leaned forward, straining to see the lines on the blurry road ahead. The glowing headlights in the rearview mirror were getting closer and closer. She was going well under the speed limit to avoid sliding off the road. How tempting it felt just to shut off the wipers and allow the rainstorm to blur her vision so that she might accidentally drive off into a ditch. What a perfect escape from this dreaded appointment. Though the thought lingered on her mind through each traffic light, Celeste continued to drive cautiously. One accident had been enough. She didn't need any more turmoil in her life, and delaying therapy wasn't going to make things better. "You need to do this," she said out loud as she glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Those green eyes that glanced back had once been so full of life. Now they grew tired and heavy from sleep deprivation and fatigue. How could she be celebrating her 22nd birthday in 2 weeks? Those lines under her eyes, and was that a gray hair? She rolled her eyes and let out a sigh. A 52-year-old woman was who she saw looking back. It was difficult beyond words carrying the burden of the things that she knew. The secrets she kept sealed inside felt like a bomb waiting to explode. The agony of knowing that she was alone in this had made it easier each day to slip into a deep depression. Now the thought of exposing all that she had kept locked away felt nerve-wracking and bittersweet. Bitter from the repercussions that were unavoidable, and sweet to know she could finally feel some sort of relief. Even though this was not her idea, she felt there was no turning back now. If this is what it would take to fix her life and make everything better, she was willing to face the heat. Downtown Pleasant Oaks was a bustling place. Like most New England towns, it was rich with history and things to see. On a typical Friday morning in June, the streets could be seen dotted with vendors, tourists, bouncing baby strollers, folks out for a stroll with their dogs, and business people alike anxious to punch out at 5 o'clock. Today, however, was anything but typical. The rain had somehow tucked all that away. Sidewalks were washed empty, with just a few people here and there rushing with their umbrellas in search of a dry, safe haven. How nice it sounded just to curl up in a cozy cafe with a good book. Celeste envied the lounging silhouettes she spotted through the glowing window of a nearby pastry shop, enjoying their cinnamon rolls, a cup of joe, and light-hearted conversations. There were no worries or stress. No uncomfortable discussions with strangers, no drawn-out moments of awkward emotions, just mouthfuls of sweet, gooey morsels, accompanied with pleasant, blissful small talk. As she turned onto Hillside Avenue and pulled up to the old brown brick building, it never occurred to her that such an eyesore had existed in all of Pleasant Oaks. The east side of the building appeared to be naturally decorated in hard water stains from the sprinklers below, mixed with streaks of red rust from the gray metal-framed windows. The few bushes that hugged the foundation seemed neglected and overgrown. There even appeared to be several shingles missing on the roof. It was a discouraging sight to see. "How lovely," she said as she turned off the ignition and pulled out the key. Trying to muster up the courage to get out of the car, Celeste inhaled a deep breath of air and slowly exhaled. It was 10:15 a.m. She was early. Realizing she had forgotten an umbrella, she pulled back her long chestnut hair and tucked it into the hood of her gray jumpsuit jacket, quickly making a run for it to the weathered green metal front door. A flash of lightning and a crack of thunder sent her full speed ahead as the icy raindrops pounded against her clothing. Once inside on the light hardwood floor, she took off her wet jacket, shook the water from it, and readjusted her hair. Looking around the lobby, something seemed a bit out of place. It was apparent that someone had tried to remodel the place on a very low budget. Her eyes drawn first to the outdated mauve floral wallpaper that graced the walls, then towards the out-of-place tan-colored suede couches with navy blue throw pillows, and finally the polished black coffee table resting on a not-so-spotless off-white shag rug. It was clear that this job was done in poor taste, or it had been left unfinished. Maybe if they invested more money into the decor, they would attract a little more business. "Can I help you?" came a voice from behind. Celeste turned to find a heavy-set red-headed woman in a lime green cardigan and black slacks coming her way. With a yellow pencil perched on her right ear and a clipboard in hand, she fit the part perfectly of a front desk receptionist. Yes, I have an appointment with Dr. Walter Kramer at 10:30. "Are you Celeste Day?" the woman asked as she made her way around Celeste towards the chair behind the front desk. A plate of half-eaten grapes and a breakfast sandwich of some sort sat resting next to her computer. "Yes, that's me." Celeste nervously tugged at her shirt sleeve. "Go ahead and fill out these forms, front and back, and when you're finished, bring them to me and I'll call you back when he's ready." It sounded as though this was a routine that the receptionist had been repeating several times throughout the day, several days a week, for several years. This was all routine, part of the job. Celeste was just another warm body coming through the door. They didn't know her or her story. How could she open up about her life in a strange building to a complete stranger? This was a mistake. What was she doing here? Was it too late to head back out the front door? "Oh, sorry. Go ahead and grab yourself a pen, sweetie. Aren't they cute? I got tired of everyone walking away with my pens, so I glued flowers on them. Try sneaking that out the door." The flowers were not only enormous, but hideous. A little gold plaque that read Jean stood next to the black jar of hot pink flower pens. Celeste reached over and grabbed one. "Thanks, Jean," she replied as she turned towards the couches to have a seat. The sound of an ambulance came zooming past the front window. As Celeste gazed upon the flashing red lights, she wished she were in that ambulance, being taken far, far away from here. Even a hospital sounded better than this place. Suddenly, a chill fell over her body as she remembered the night of the accident. The sounds of the ambulance and patrol cars, the taste of fresh blood in her mouth, the pungent smell of the ER, the gasps from the nurses and doctors. It was a night that she found herself forever haunted by. A part of her life that had completely changed her in a way that she didn't understand and couldn't explain. A part of the reason as to why she was here. "Celeste?" A pleasant-sounding man's voice came from her side. Heart pounding, Celeste stood up with an empty feel in the pit of her stomach, as whom she presumed to be Dr. Kramer made his way over to greet his next appointment. Her nerves were soon calmed by the appearance before her. A tall, broad man with salt and pepper wavy hair, kind brown eyes behind barely noticeable glasses, and a gentle and understanding smile. All atop a light blue Oxford shirt, gray and navy blue striped tie, and gray slacks. He did not belong in this building, and that was a good thing. "Hi, Celeste. I'm Walter Kramer. It's nice to meet you." He extended a hearty handshake. "Thank you," she replied, still a little in awe. "Right this way if you don't mind. I apologize ahead of time about the boxes in my office. I'm new here to Pleasant Oaks. Just moved into my office a few weeks ago, but most of my boxes just arrived. I'm still trying to sort through things." Celeste followed him into the large room. The floors were the same light wood as in the lobby. Boxes lined the perimeter and were also stacked in the far back corner. For not being completely unpacked, he had a very nice and tidy office. Off to the right was a small yet spacious black wooden desk containing a few small framed pictures and an ornately carved wooden mantel clock. A few potted plants and light blue ceramic vases sat on a beautiful white wood table near a window on the right wall, which viewed the surrounding hills. A contemporary-looking gray leather chaise lounge stood adjacent to the table. The walls were crisp, clean, and freshly painted in light steel bluish gray. Degrees and awards of various sorts hung in shiny black frames along the wall. Celeste's eyes were soon drawn to a beautiful serene oil painting which hung on the far back wall. It was of a large white lily. That image alone seemed to breathe life, hope, and healing into the entire room. It was a very pleasant atmosphere to be in on such a dark and dreary day. "Have a seat." He seemed very enthused as he guided her towards a soft white armchair. Celeste sat down, pulling her long hair from off her shoulders, tucking it behind her back. Her feet rested tight together with hands clasped between her knees. The gray jumpsuit she had worn was damp from the rain, and she didn't want to ruin his chair. He sat down across from her in a matching armchair, legs crossed as he opened up a black folder and pulled out a pen. "What a day, huh?" he began. Celeste glanced over to the window. The rain was still coming down. "Not typical for this part of June," she replied. "I like to think of it as a free car wash," he responded with a smile. Here was a man who saw the glass half full. He was in the perfect field. His wife and children were very lucky. Celeste had noticed their family portrait sitting next to his computer. How she envied those 3 little brunette children and their beautiful dark-haired mother who were sitting on a grassy bank with a lake behind them. They seemed like the perfect happy family, something she knew little about. "So why don't you just start by telling me why you were here today?" Walter said as he sat back in his chair, eyes resting on her. "Well, to be honest, I'm here because everyone thinks I need to be." Celeste had a hard time looking Walter in his eyes. As kind as he seemed, it was very uncomfortable sharing anything personal with someone she didn't yet know. Would he even believe her? Or would he side with everyone else? She wasn't sure if she wanted to find out. "Who is everyone?" Walter asked, his kind face and gentle tone never wavering. "You know, my parents, co-workers, friends, pretty much everyone." Celeste didn't feel like going into detail. "And why have they asked you to come?" "It's a long story, but they think ever since my accident, well, that I've really lost my marbles." There, she had said it. Her family thought she was crazy, nuts. Her life was a complete mess, and there didn't seem to be a light at the end of this tunnel. Could this appointment be over now? Accident? Must have been very traumatic. "Tell me, when did it occur and what happened?" Walter's face seemed to change now, donning a bit of concern at what he was about to hear. Crossing her arms and rubbing her elbows, Celeste looked down. How could she tell him what really happened and also spare him the details? "It was just a car accident. I mean, I wasn't supposed to make it, but here I am." She forced a smile. "It was 6 months ago, to the very day, but it feels like it just happened." That was all he needed to know. She watched as Walter adjusted his glasses and made some notes in his folder. "You don't have to share the details today," he said. "When you're ready, we can talk more about it. I think today I'd like for you to just help me get to know you better. The better I know you, the better I can understand how to help. Take me back in time. Tell me about your childhood, your family. What was it like for you growing up? Then we'll go from there." What was this? An interview? At least she could avoid discussing her accident. How hard could it be to talk about the distant past? Not as hard as the recent past. There he sat, so concerned and yet so patient. He seldom looked away when she spoke and seemed to nod his head either in agreement or just from habit after every sentence she spoke. "I was born and raised here in Pleasant Oaks. I grew up in a family of 4, mom, dad, and a twin brother." Walter seemed very interested with what little information she had given him. He hadn't said anything yet, so she figured she would continue. "Adam is his name, my twin brother. Technically, he's older by about 4 minutes. A smile found its way across her face, and she began to light up. We were best friends. We did everything together. My parents never had any more children. My mom said it was because one set of twins was all she could handle, so we grew really close. Adam was the best brother anyone could have. I mean, I didn't have any other brothers, but I knew if I did, he would still be my favorite. He was kind, thoughtful, always looking out for me. If someone disagreed with me, he always took my side. Adam was the better looking half. Tall, dark hair, physically fit, very charming, and a great sense of humor. He had a lot of friends and was good at everything he tried. Piano, guitar, baseball. He even made the best brownies in the county. They won first place at the county fair. I was never jealous, but always proud that he was my brother. I looked up to him in so many ways. Walter nodded his head. And how is your relationship today? Celeste hesitated. Well, there's something you should know. About 4 years ago, Adam was the star athlete on our high school basketball team. It was our senior year, and Dad was really pleased that Adam had earned a scholarship to Columbia. That was where Dad had graduated. I was proud of Adam too, and happy that his achievements had brought our family closer together. I mean, my parents never talked about me the way they talked about Adam. I could be in the middle of arguing with my dad, and when Adam walked into the room, Dad would stop. My brother had a natural, subtle way of demanding everyone's respect. He could influence anyone to be happier and better without saying a word at all. So it sounds as though you had the ideal brother, Walter confirmed. What I'd like to know is what kind of a sister and daughter you were, if you don't mind. He reached for a water bottle from the floor and took a sip. Heart pounding, Celeste swallowed. She couldn't avoid it now. I was worried you might ask me that. Celeste's enthusiasm for her brother seemed to fade, and again she looked down at the floor. I was the quieter child, into books and my studies. I had a couple of friends, and occasionally we'd hang out together after school. I got asked on dates, but I usually turned them down with made-up excuses. My mom always told me that I was beauty pageant material, but that my odd behaviors would turn people away. I didn't have many talents, but I did have something unique. My grandmother told me it was a gift, but my parents begged to differ. It bothered them a great deal when I would talk about it. I think they were embarrassed, so I learned over time I was better off keeping it to myself. Walter leaned forward and pressed his pen against his chin. Tell me about this gift. Oh, you don't have to call it a gift. That was just my grandmother's way of trying to protect me and make me feel special. I call it unexplainable experiences, and other people call it ESP, extrasensory perception, Walter commented. Yes, the sixth sense. Celeste felt the blood rushing to her face. I would dream about something or see it in my mind, and then it would happen. Can you share an example? Walter asked. Sure. When I was 7 years old, Adam and I were walking home from one of his baseball practices. He stopped to tie his shoe, and as I watched him, I suddenly knew that something bad was about to happen. Just out of nowhere, I knew, without question, that he would be hit by a car. Before I could say anything, he was up and running down the street, shouting, "I'll race you home!" He turned to look back at me as I screamed. At that moment, a brown van turned the corner and hit my brother. The van sped away, and I fell to the ground crying at what had just happened, feeling powerless to have stopped it. You felt guilty because you knew it was going to happen, but you couldn't stop it, Walter added. Yes, I felt it was my fault. I had seen the brown van turn that corner before it ever happened. I knew, and I should have been able to prevent it. What frustrated me the most was that I couldn't figure out why I had been allowed to see this event, yet not do anything to prevent it. Don't you think if it was really a gift from God that He would allow me to use it to do good? You do believe in a higher power then? Walter asked while taking notes in his folder. Are you a Christian? Yes. I mean, my parents took us to church every Sunday, but they never seemed to practice what was preached. They felt that church was good for me and would fix my strange behaviors. I resented church for that very reason. It was hard for me to know if God really existed because most of the time I felt completely abandoned by Him. It was then Celeste wondered if she had said too much. What about you? Do you believe in God? She asked. Well, This appointment isn't about me, Celeste. But if you must know, I was raised by a church-going family as well. Circumstances in life altered my beliefs, and of course, with my field of study and profession, I have felt it's best to remain neutral. But of course, my intentions are to help you utilize your faith as a tool. People that have some sort of spiritual foundation tend to heal better. Celeste stared at Walter in awe. He seemed so confident in his answer and implied that he was agnostic, as if it were no big deal. Yet, for not knowing or believing in God, he appeared to be so happy and at peace. The fine lines around his eyes were not from the strains of a hard life, but rather from the smiles of much laughter. Maybe all these years of wondering if God existed had been quite the waste of time and energy. Here sat a man who never gave it any thought at all, and he seemed perfectly happy and normal. Now back to you, Celeste. Go on with your story. Okay. Well, a man came walking over, just out of nowhere, and told us that everything would be okay. He was very kind and helpful, and waited with us until the ambulance arrived. He kept assuring me that I would be okay, which I later found to be odd, as it was Adam lying on the ground injured, not me. In fact, I don't know if it was the shock that Adam was in or what, but he said that he never saw anyone there with me. The 911 dispatch had the recording of a man's voice calling in, saying that he had witnessed an accident. He gave them the location, and then the call was disconnected. They never were able to trace where the call had come from. After that, I never saw him again. The police officer who first arrived asked me if there may have been any witnesses. I turned to point to the man who had been standing beside me throughout the whole ordeal, but he was gone. I never got to thank him. Adam ended up only suffering a broken leg, but was unable to play the rest of the season. When I told my parents about my experience, they were angry. They told me to never mention it again, so I didn't. I think a part of them wondered if it really had been true. If it were true, well, then that would mean that the accident was my fault, because I could have prevented it. Even though they knew it wasn't my fault, they treated me as if it were. These experiences continued all throughout my childhood. Adam didn't think I was crazy or making them up, because he would come into my room at night and ask me to tell him all the details. He believed that I had a gift, and he thought it was pretty cool. I was, however, freaked out by this gift, and would much rather have traded it for a great singing voice or acting talent. Celeste paused, waiting for Walter to process her story. He seemed to be in deep thought, staring at her as if he hadn't even realized she had finished speaking. As the awkward silence set in, Walter cleared his throat and then began writing in his folder. Oh no, did he think she was crazy too? Why wasn't he saying anything? Then he looked up, setting his folder down, and with a gentle smile responded. Sometimes we feel overwhelmed by the challenges we often don't get to choose. The beautiful thing about it, however, is the moment we learn how to use those challenges to our advantage. Opposition always has its benefits. This won't make much sense at the moment, but in a few weeks, months, maybe even years from now, I'm quite sure it will. How could one man radiate so much positive energy? Just his tone of voice and gentle smile alone were enough to convince Celeste that whatever he said was absolutely correct. He could have just told her that a catastrophic meteor was minutes away from hitting the Earth, and that she would be the one to stop it from happening, and she would have believed him. We'll go back in our forthcoming sessions and revisit these experiences. Because we have a time limit, quickly take me through the recent events of what led to your appointment today. The term quickly was irrelevant to the lengthy events and deep secrets she had been harboring over the last few years alone. How could she just sum up so much detail and emotion in the length it would take for a sitcom commercial break? Then again, if Walter asked her to do it, it must be possible. She took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Where do I even begin? She adjusted her position in her chair and then stared off to the right in deep concentration, as if watching it all play out on a movie screen. It was our senior year, and like I said before, Adam was on top of the world. He had just announced his scholarship, played half of a straight-win season in basketball, and had won the hearts of the entire cheerleading squad, including the head cheerleader, Bethany Knowles. She pursued my brother like a leopard would a baby deer. He didn't seem to mind, and they were soon inseparable. My dad was so proud of Adam that he surprised him with a truck for an early graduation gift, a shiny black 2005 Chevy Silverado that I nicknamed the Beast. To me, it was a reminder of the shadow that I was to my brother, not only in my parents' eyes, but the entire community. I wasn't worthy of such a present, and this seemed to overpower my barely noticeable existence. I wasn't angry at Adam, and I wanted him to have that truck. I knew if anything, it meant I wouldn't have to take the bus anymore to school. I think in a way, it scared me though. You know, like I had been replaced. Adam had more freedom now, and I worried that I wasn't going to see him around as often. Who would be there to defend me from the constant wrath of my parents? Bethany and the Beast had taken my place. He'd be going to college soon, and then I'd never see him. Where was I going? What was going to happen to me? Tears began to pool in Celeste's eyes as Walter reached across and handed her a tissue. I feel so bad for saying this because at the time I had no idea that Adam leaving for college was the least of my worries. It was the morning of one of the biggest games of the year. Our rival, Greenwood High, undefeated state champions for the last 4 years, was playing us in a home game. Local radio and news had been following this star-studded event for weeks leading up. Adam was in the spotlight and feeling the pressure. That morning, I was with my grandmother. Her health was failing, and I had offered to spend my Saturday mornings taking care of her in her home. Adam had dropped me off and was supposed to pick me up at noon. Around 11:30, I had this terrible feeling come over me that Adam was in trouble. I tried to shake it off, but then it seemed to take over my mind. I saw a very clear image of Adam lying passed out in his truck. There seemed to be a smoky dark mist or fog that encircled his face. The sight of it frightened me, and I ran to pick up the phone. I dialed the house, and there was no answer. I called Adam's phone, and it rang to his voicemail. Panic set in as I began to feel powerless. That same feeling I had experienced years ago. This time was going to be different. I was going to stop it with every fiber in my being. I left my grandmother eating at her kitchen table, and I raced out that front door. Not knowing what to do, I just began running down the street, screaming and yelling Adam's name. A neighbor came out and called to me, asking if she could help. Gasping for air and choking on tears, I begged for a ride home. I had to reach Adam before it was too late. She ran for her keys, and seconds later, we were in her car racing towards home. She tried to call me and ask me what on earth was the matter, but I was at a loss for words. When we pulled up to the house, my heart sank as I saw my mother crying in the front doorway, groceries spilled all over the floor. I asked her what was wrong, and all she could say was Adam's name. I ran through the kitchen, overpowered by the scent of strong exhaust fumes, and made my way over to where I saw my dad in the doorway of the garage. He was on the phone with 911. It was then I knew what had happened. I ran over to Adam's truck, where I found him lying inside, passed out on the seat. His face was a pale bluish color, and his eyes were closed. I put my hands on his chest and started shaking him and yelling at him to wake up, but he didn't. My dad pushed me away and told me to stop. I could see it in his eyes that he knew Adam was dead. All I could do was shout, "No!" over and over in complete anger. It was then that the paramedics arrived, and I anxiously watched as they made some quick efforts to revive him. After what seemed like an eternity of attempts, they said there was nothing more they could do. I ran to my room sobbing as I couldn't bear to watch them place the white sheet over his body. It was so final. Had it been an accident? Walter asked as he handed Celeste another tissue. I want to believe with all my heart that it was, but there were so many rumors that began to swirl. News quickly broke that Bethany had dumped Adam the night before. He had never mentioned anything to us about it, but his best friend, Wes Cartwright, confirmed it. People also thought that maybe the pressure of the big game had something to do with it. That just seemed ridiculous. Not even a day had passed, and the front headline in the local newspaper read, read, "Star athlete ends life over bad breakup." I was furious, and my parents were devastated. Devastated because they believed it was true. After that day, my dad was never the same. That hopeful light had left his eyes. He must have aged about 10 years within just a few months. He and my mom slowly began to drift apart until they weren't speaking at all. The only time I heard them speak to each other was when they were fighting about me. When Adam died, all of us died inside. He was the reason we had made it this far as a family. When he was gone, everything seemed to fall apart. My dad's bitter depression got the best of him, and after 12 years of being CEO of the second largest restaurant chain management company in North America, he was asked to resign. He just couldn't get over Adam's death, and it almost destroyed him. My mother convinced him to plead for his job, and they agreed that if he sought treatment, they would reconsider. Dad went to counseling, and after a couple of months, all he had learned was how to turn off his emotions when needed. Nothing was resolved, but it worked, and he kept his position. "What about you?" Walter asked. "After high school, what did you do?" "I had to stay busy, so I went to school. Just community college. I had big shoes to fill, and I wanted to finally make my parents proud. Fortunately, I was able to get an internship as a case manager working with troubled youth. I felt I had a connection with these kids and might have something to offer them. It was the only way to take my mind off all my other problems. I was still living at home and did all I could to avoid being there." Adam's best friend Wes slowly began to take Adam's place. He had practically been family before Adam died, and I think Dad used him as a way to fill that void in our lives. There would be nights I would come home from school to find Wes at the dinner table with my parents, or watching a game on TV with my dad. I think Wes felt obligated to be there for our family. To the community, our family seemed to have bounced back. My parents had always been in a high circle of influence and wealth and didn't want to lose their position. Their image is the only reason they haven't divorced. I'm sure of it. After getting close to rock bottom, my mom realized there was way too much to lose, and so she focused on damage control for the next several months. Amidst everything going on, they seemed to have forgotten about me, my thoughts, and my feelings. They never once questioned if I was okay. "That must have been very hard," Walter responded. "How did you cope?" Wes felt sorry for me, and during those times, he became a good friend. In fact, it really lifted my dad's spirits. I was finally good for something. I was the key to keeping Wes in the family. My friendship with Wes didn't cure the pain. I still carried the guilt of not being able to prevent Adam's death. One day, while in an argument with my dad over the fact that I had gotten into an argument with Wes, I exploded. I told my dad that it was my fault that Adam had died, and for the first time ever, I told him about my experience, thinking it would somehow help him to understand the guilt I had been carrying around. I was wrong. It backfired, and he told me I was insane, crazy, and an embarrassment to the family. He accused me of lying for attention. That was the moment I decided to end my life. The next week, I began planning my death. I was going to mix some medications and do my best to make it look like an accident. The night I was ready to pull it off, my parents had gone out to some charity dinner, and I was going to make sure that they found me dead on the couch when they came back. That was until a change of events happened. I just couldn't do it in that house. Not the same place where Adam had died. So after seeing the snowy weather conditions outside, I decided I was going to have an accident. "You see those hills out your window?" "Yes," Walter replied, looking curiously out the window. "Those were the very hills I drove to, where I was going to end my life. Because you are here today in my office, clearly it wasn't your time to go," Walter responded as he reached for his water. "So, tell me what happened." "A guy," Celeste replied. "He was a complete stranger, and he saved my life." Walter took off his glasses and set them on the table. "We still have a few minutes left," he said. "Tell me very quickly about this stranger." Well, there he was, standing with no coat in a blizzard. I felt sorry for him, so I pulled over. He said he needed a ride and that his car had broken down. So I drove him to his destination, dropped him off, and then never saw him again. Whatever it was that he said to me in the car somehow changed my perspective of things. Suddenly, I lost the desire to end my life. For the first time since Adam's death, I felt a sense of hope. You said you never saw this guy again? Walter asked, rubbing his fingers on his chin. Well, you see, after I dropped him off, he strangely disappeared. One minute he was by the car, and the next minute I opened the door and he was gone. So I decided to head home, trying to make sense of what had just happened, including the change of heart I was experiencing. I must have not been paying very good attention to my surroundings. 2 blocks away from where I dropped him off, I was broadsided by a delivery truck. The driver lost control on the snowy road and slid right through a red light. I wasn't supposed to make it. In fact, I arrived at the hospital already dead. Somehow, I came back in the ER and was in a coma for 2 weeks and in recovery for 4 months. That's why I'm here. Things happened to me during these last 6 months that I can't explain. I can't make sense of it all, and sometimes I wonder if I am really crazy. Everyone else seems to think so. They said the accident had worsened me, not even knowing that I had attempted suicide. I don't think I can return to work, school, or function normally until I get some help. Walter leaned forward, his smiley face now turned to concern. Celeste, what you just told me was very important and very personal to you. I'm sure it was pretty difficult for you to share. I can see why you felt obligated to keep your experiences secret, and it makes perfect sense that others might deem you as not coherent or dishonest. Out of my 18 years of professional experience, I have never encountered a patient with abilities or experiences like yours. You are very unique and should not be ashamed the least. Actually, I'm very fascinated by what you have shared with me today, and I'm going to do my best to help you in the way that you need. It's going to require a bit more time than my usual appointments, and will require a lot of effort on your part. Are you willing to do this? Celeste looked down at the floor and thought for a moment, and then she replied, if it means being normal, then yes. I'd like to know what that feels like. Walter smiled. I'd like to see you exactly a week from today. Jean will schedule that for you out at the front desk. As Celeste made her way to the front desk, her feelings of renewed hope had given her the motivation she knew she'd need to make it to the next appointment. Finally, she would be able to break the chains of the guilt she'd carried for so long. As she made her way down the hall, a cold chill suddenly ran down her neck. She looked behind her. There was no one there. Then she saw it. A dark, heavy shadow made its way across her path. It seemed to stare her up and down, as if it very well knew she was there. Celeste froze, too terrified to move another step. Feelings of despair, sadness, and fear began flooding into her mind. She couldn't have screamed even if she wanted to. What was happening? Sweetheart, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jean came toward her as the dark shadow dissipated. I'm fine, just feeling a little dizzy. I hope it wasn't a bad experience with Dr. Kramer. Are you wanting to reschedule? Jean put her arm around Celeste and guided her across the lobby to her desk. Yes, a week from now. Same time if I can. I hope you get to feeling better. This rain can sure put a damper on things. Jean handed Celeste a card with her appointments written down. I hope so too, she replied. On her way out the door, all Celeste could think about was her experience in the hallway. It was happening again. She knew what this meant. She knew, and it terrified her. All right, you guys, I will see you next week when we read Chapter 2. See you next time.